Welcome to Marcia and Portia, episode 6.
This is part 2 of our Constitution chats, and we want to talk a little bit more about the values that the authors or framers of the Constitution operated on.
Yeah.
We felt like this was important because this year there's been a lot of chatter about what morals and principles our Constitution was framed on and set on. So we want to talk a little bit about what the Founding Fathers said and what they didn't say today.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of talk about how flawed our Founding Fathers were.
And obviously they were human.
Yeah.
And there's also been a lot of talk about what their beliefs were. And absolutely, all of us and all mankind, I think, identify with some kind of belief system or structure, or whether it's atheism or Catholicism or whatever. But the Founding Fathers agreed to create a document that was based on some kind of human morality or core values, might be a way we would say it in 2021.
Yeah.
But really, these guys were deists. A lot of themselves described themselves as deists. So whether you want to call it God or the universe or your intuition or the Holy Spirit or something else.
Whatever higher power, higher being.
That's really what they operated from. The term God was used in general terms in the Constitution, never in association with a religion or belief system. In fact, I don't think the word God is really used formally to address an entity at all in the Constitution.
Well, we have to remember what the framers and what the creators of our American government came from. They came from a system of government where freedom of religion was not standard. It was not celebrated.
They were completely oppressed in terms of their beliefs.
Yes. And so to kind of believe that they then started America on those same principles is kind of a flawed way to understand the formation of our government.
I couldn't agree more.
Right. And so I think, we talk a lot and we hear a lot about like our inalienable rights, the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And what's really important to understand is that the founders believed those were rights inherently present in each of us.
Just because you're born as a human, really. And they refer to a lot in the time frame that we're referring to as the natural laws of the universe or the laws of nature. And that's really what they were operating from when they wrote the Constitution, because they believed in the premise that all men truly were created equal, and just because they were born, they were given these inalienable rights, which were laid out in the Constitution, that would supersede a government.
Right, and they were natural rights that everybody had. And yes, was America perfect at its founding, and was everybody in practice being treated with equality of their natural rights? No. But the founders created a government that would ultimately be able to uphold each citizen's natural rights. And I think that's what's important to understand too, is yes, it wasn't perfect, and it wasn't born in perfect circumstances, but the founders created our Constitution and drafted our Constitution with an eye and truly believing that Americans have natural rights and that this document would protect those.
Right. And so then to take it a step farther, the Founding Fathers they made an assumption that Americans would operate and hold accountability or responsibility to a higher being or a higher source of some kind, which would supersede any regulation of a government. So it's kind of like almost like the honor system that they set up for us. We have a moral obligation to each other, to our neighbors, to our neighborhoods, to our society. So they created this and operated on the premise that everybody's going to hold themselves accountable to some code of moral obligation or core value or belief system, and everybody's going to treat others with respect. And then what Veronica alluded to was when people bastardize that and when they use religion as a crutch to justify criminal behavior, or let's just say crimes against humanity, that's when the government steps in and says separation of church and state. You cannot steal, you cannot murder, you can do no harm. And so that is where, as humans, we are flawed, and we will sometimes take religion or take a belief system and twist it to our will. And that's where the government then comes in and says, we're here to uphold the rule of law. And the rule of law says that every American has the freedom to live by a set of moral guidelines or a compass that guides them and to conduct their affairs and their family lives in a way that suits them best, as long as there is no harm, no murder, things like that. So it's kind of this idea that we have to hold ourselves to a higher moral ground. And I think that's what's cultivated the American spirit.
It is, yeah.
And it has produced these American greats, whether it's people or inventions. And that's also when our government comes in and says, and then you cannot infringe on the rights of others. So it's an interesting balance, that premise, but you really have to understand, as floofy or feathery or as hippie as you think it is, that the Constitution writers wrote on the premise of a higher power of some kind without having to prescribe to a religion that guides you to be a strong person. It's when we get away from the divine or a belief in God or the universe that we then allow the government to tell us what's right and what's wrong. We're allowing another set of people to regulate us.
Right.
And so that's what happens when we step away from our natural organic connection to the earth and to the universe. And we ask a governing body of other humans to tell us
our rights and to tell us what we can and cannot do, which is again not what the founding fathers anticipated would happen
or intended.
Yeah. And it really is important to know that there's a difference between saying God or religion, because that's not really truly what the Constitution was founded upon. Truly, it was founded upon, however you want to say it, morals, a belief in a higher power, a belief in good in general, good versus evil, that people would have some compass to guide them to caring for other people and caring about each other and caring about our United States community.
And thankfully, we have made developments in science, statistics, research to help us evolve as a human race to say all are equal regardless of race or background, and all religions are, accepted here. And we're still working to adjust and create and fix some of those systemic problems. But where we see a lot of systemic problems, if you truly trace it back, you will generally find an imbalance of government overreach that generally stems from one belief system, not necessarily a faith, but one belief system having more say over another. And so it is an interesting concept. We know we're bringing kind of an abstract thought into this conversation, but if you really start to learn about the framers, you realize that they, for all their intelligence and science and the engineers and the inventors who came together and created our Constitution, these guys also believed in a greater power, most of them of some kind,
and believed that most people shared that belief and would continue to share that belief in the country that they founded. And that's why they drafted the Constitution and our system of government the way that they did, is because it would really continue to work if people continued to be a moral people guided by a belief in some higher power. So we just kind of wanted to introduce that concept because I think that's not something a lot of people know or people might misunderstand.
For sure. Yeah. And it is hard to wrap your mind around, but that's kind of the whole purpose of why we're here, is to kind of help provoke some thought, help you kind of ask those questions, and maybe even ask those questions of yourself, like what guides you to do and say the right thing, to treat others with respect, to respect someone that you disagree with. The government can't tell you to do that. It has to come from a place of knowing what kind of character you want to have and what kind of character you want to pass on to your children or your friends or the people around you. So we hope in having this conversation that it requires you and asks of you to dig a little deeper and to ask some questions of yourself, and to also put an understanding and a framework around what the Constitution was designed to do and why, because it has been so misunderstood. But we can learn so much from it, and so much from the perspective of those really intelligent men.
And we're going to continue to talk about, we don't really want to go through each sentence of the Constitution and explain it, but we're going to kind of highlight some of what we believe to be some of the most important components of the Constitution in some different kind of video forms, and kind of explain a little bit more about this foundational document that we all need to know about. So,
and as always, you can leave us a comment or shoot us a DM if you would like more information or more resources on the topics that we covered in our episode today.
All right, see you next time.
Bye.